on your way out.
Can you tell us what the situation is in Lake County, Indiana, where the 2,000 forms turned out to be bogus? What happened there? They set aside 5,000 election forms. What's being done about those? Can you explain what happened there and what your group is doing about it?
And then we want Miles to come up. He asked us.
Again, I haven't been on the ground in Lake County, but I'm familiar with the folks who work there, and I know CNN has provided extensive coverage of each voter registration form. But the 2,000 bad forms that we've heard about in reports is about the amount that we turned in saying combined, these are problematic forms and these are duplicate forms. And that number was unacceptably high to us. We actually closed down that operation for a while until we could bring in new management, because out of 8,000 forms that we think we've collected and a couple thousand that were either duplicates or missing information or having problems, seemed unacceptably high. It was wasting time and resources to go through that. But it seems one thing that has been puzzling about all this is that we've been doing this work now for a year in some places, several months in most, and week by week turning in packages of forms that with ones where we verified, ones where it looks fine, we haven't reached the person, ones that are problematic. And in the last weeks before the election, we're now hearing, in some cases card by card, about packages of cards that we brought to the attention of election officials. And we've had a good relationship with election officials across the country in most cases, and met regularly with them, and our lawyers have met regularly with them, and our organizers have, to talk through any problems, if there's any ways we can do the work better and more efficiently. And now, in the closing weeks of the campaign, there are allegations that are being widely reported, trumpeted, and we really think distorted or at least misunderstood in order to cast aspersions on the hundreds of thousands and millions of new people who are coming into the election process. And this sounds familiar to us because in events that were reported later as the U.S. Attorney scandal, or U.S. Attorney Gate, all of this has happened before. With great fanfare in New Mexico in 2004, there was an investigation of ACORN announced, and U.S. Attorney David Iglesias made very strong statements about how he was going to get to the bottom of these charges, and in the end found that there was nothing to charge anyone with. There was no basis for any charges. And he was fired. And this is all a matter of public record, and he's talked about it. He was fired for not bringing trumped-up charges against ACORN.
I mean, in New Mexico, I was in New Mexico, and they said they've fired 80 workers since December because of suspicious registrations. Do you acknowledge that maybe you guys have to do a better job of picking your workers and hiring people?
We've hired and trained 13,000 people in doing this effort, and so we'd like to not have to fire 80 people or 100 people or whatever the exact number turns out to be, but 13,000 is a lot of workers, and this is not the easiest work, and it's work that by its nature can't be done with everybody staying in one place and being watched. You have to fan out into the community and do your work. ACORN, by the way, agrees with the other speakers who said that it shouldn't be up to community groups to go out and fill out these registration forms by hand. We have sued recently in Missouri together, I believe, with DEMOS and other organizations for better enforcement of the National Voter Registration Act. In the first month that the court ruling went into effect, 12,000 additional people were registered in the state of Missouri. So maybe if that court ruling had come a couple years earlier, we wouldn't have had to hire and train and supervise and deal with the work of thousands and thousands of people across the country. But on the whole, that effort, what those young workers have done, is heroic work for our democracy. It's not easy, and they deserve, on the whole, to be applauded for that.
But do you take responsibility for the 2,000 applications? Or, I mean, do you take those were your workers? Do you take responsibility for that?
Right. We did when we turned them in with a note that said these applications have problems. They're probably not valid. We are required by law and good judgment to bring those to the boards of elections because we can't legally or wisely throw them in the garbage. What if there's a real voter in there?
like, why are you legally required? I mean, what laws are passed? How did that come to be to require you to submit the registrations that obviously look false?
And that's the reason that we, if they look false, we identify them as such. The laws vary by state. I'm not our lawyer, but in the end, what we are collecting is applications from people to register to vote. We can't judge, we're not legally able to judge the validity of it, although we can have a good guess and put something on top that says it's the same, same name as yesterday. It's up to elections officials to make that determination. In some places, that's an explicit state law. In some states or counties, the law is about a time period in which you must deliver it, which implies you have to deliver it. And in general, the advice of counsel and good judgment is that we should not discard any filled out voter registration form. If we have a strong reason to believe it's not valid, we bring it forward as such. We also do that because we want the help of elections officials and prosecutors in prosecuting anyone who has turned in an invalid application. And yeah, please go ahead.
Let me just say, in agreement with Kevin just said, as a former election official, I would not want an organization to decide which registrations they were going to turn in and which they are not. That is an absolute invitation to real problems. Well, we didn't turn this in because we didn't think it was right, and what was the real motivation? So I think it's absolutely right for ACORN to do, and absolutely right for state law to require all of the registration forms that have been filled out to be turned in. And I think it's an indication, just to, for me at least, to make a final couple of observations. I think that is an indication what they have done, that there is not an attempt by the organization to defraud the election process. There is an attempt to make sure that those valid registrations get in and that the invalid registrations are identified, and cooperation with election officials is essential. That's number one. Number two, I really believe that we have an opportunity to have a huge voter turnout this year. Election officials, political parties, political campaigns at all levels have a responsibility not to attempt to focus everyone's energy and attention on the relatively few problems, but rather to encourage everyone to come into the process, everyone to vote, and then make sure that the system is set up on Election Day to handle the large numbers of people that are going to come in. That's a good sign for our democracy, not a bad sign. I don't think ACORN has detracted from our democracy. I think they have added to it. Then I think, after the election, regardless who wins, a serious look at our election processes, from the voter machines to the poll workers to the registration requirements to identification requirements to the maintenance of voting lists, needs a real thorough look, and the application of serious national standards and serious national resources, so we have a democracy where every single person is encouraged to vote and every single vote is counted properly. And with that, I thank you very much, for at least for me.